My name is John Shelton. I'm a video technician for Deposition, located at 69 West Washington Street, Chicago, Illinois. The date is April 20th, 1994, and the time is approximately 10:16 a.m. We are present here today at 515 North State Street, Chicago, Illinois, with reference to the case entitled Crenshaw et al. Versus Sutherland et al., pending in the District Court of Johnson County, Texas, 18th Judicial District, number 73-93. The witness is Mr. Dennis L. Breo. An audio-visual recording of this deposition is at the request of plaintiffs.
Go ahead and swear in the witness, please.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony about to give is cause to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Would you state your name for the record?
Dennis Breo?
Mr. Breo, you're one of the defendants in this case, is that correct?
Yes, I am.
Do you understand that you are under oath to tell the truth today?
Yes, sir.
Okay. We are here at the AMA's offices in Chicago, Illinois, is that right?
That's correct.
And you live and work in Chicago yourself, do you not?
I do.
Have you pretty much lived here most of your life and worked here most of your life?
Yes.
You are a writer for the Journal of the American Medical Association, is that correct?
That's correct.
And back in 1992, you wrote a three-part series on the assassination of President Kennedy that was published in 2 editions of JAMA, that is on May 27th and October 7th, 1992. Is that correct?
Yes.
And do you consider yourself to be a journalist?
I do.
You're not a scientist or a medical doctor, is that right?
I am not.
You have not had any formal medical training or education in the field of science or medicine, is that correct?
No.
That's not correct?
I mean, that is correct. I have not had any training.
Thank you. Your work for JAMA involves reporting and writing journalistic articles, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Is it a cardinal value to you as a journalist to get the truth to the best of your ability and to inform the reader?
Yes.
When reporting, do you sit down with your subject, talk to him, do background research on him, talk to other people about him, and then sit down and write it?
Object to the form of the question.
Is that a fair statement?
It varies from story to story and interviewee to interviewee.
Well, I was reading basically something that I believe that you said in your prior deposition in this case on September 15th. Do you remember describing what you do in the reporting process in that way?
Might I see the reference?
Sure, on page 20 of your deposition on September 15th.
Page 20, what line, Brad?
Let me find it. Line 10. Would you read what you said there?
Reporting. I sit down with you, talk to you, do background research on you, talk to other people about you, sit down and think about what I have. I sift through it, make determinations about the news value, and then I sit down and write it.
Was that an accurate description of what you do in reporting?
Well, in fairness, the question was, forgive me, Mr. Breo, I still would like, if you would, to explain a little better for me the distinction between reporting and writing a story. So the answer was responsive to that question, not the one you just asked.
Okay. Was that an accurate description of the reporting process that you do?
Yes.
Is it true, Mr. Breo, that you believe that face-to-face interviews are preferable because they're more effective?
Normally, yes.
Okay.
I found that to be the case.
And that's just common sense. You believe that's just common sense, right?
Well, there are a lot of reasons for it. I take my own photographs, so it's necessary to do it face-to-face, and you know, you see the person in his own environment, and it's generally more effective.
And you have said that that's just common sense, haven't you?
Where, could you show me that reference?
Yes, look on page 199.
199.
Line 10 and 11. Well, I guess you said it's kind of common sense, it's common knowledge. Is that what you said?
Your question was, at the time, do you have any reason to believe that a face-to-face interview is more effective than an over-the-telephone interview, other than what you stated? And my answer was, I've talked to Chip Babcock and Rick Nelson on the phone. I've not talked to them in person. It's more effective to talk to people in person. It's kind of common sense. It's common knowledge.
Okay, that was your answer?
That was my answer.
All right. And you normally do face-to-face interviews. Is that right?
Back to the form of the question.
Now, you wrote the 2 articles on the JFK assassination that were published in the May 27, 1992 edition of JAMA. Is that right?
That's correct.
And those were journalistic articles, not peer-reviewed scientific research papers. Is that right?
Yes.
So you were the writer of those articles.
Yes.
Were you also?
And the reporter.
Okay, so you were also the reporter for the articles. Is that right?
Yes.
And in those articles, you referred in several places to Dr. Charles Crenshaw. Is that correct?
I quoted several physicians who referred to Dr. Crenshaw.
Well, you made several references yourself to Dr. Crenshaw, didn't you?
I believe most of them were summaries of the quotes from the doctors I interviewed.
The articles did make references to Dr. Crenshaw, is that right?
In quotations by the physicians I interviewed, yes.
Well, are you saying that every reference you made in those 2 articles were in quotations?
Essentially, or a paraphrase of the quotation, or a summary of the quotations.
All right, I ask you to look at your second article that appeared in the May 27, 1992 edition as previously been marked as Exhibit 3B.
Okay, I'll have to, what page, or do you have that there, Chip?
Yeah, we're getting it.
Okay.
This is not a very complete copy.
Here, I'll just show you the first page of that article. Ask you to take a look at it, Mr. Brill. Do you see in the first paragraph of the second column of that article you talk about Dr. Crenshaw and the book JFK Conspiracy of Silence?
I see a reference to Dr. Crenshaw, yes.
And in the last sentence of that paragraph, you said that Crenshaw attributes these statements and others to his alleged intense eyewitness observations of the dying president. Do you see that?
Yes.
And that wasn't a quote from any of the Dallas doctors, was it?
No.
Isn't it true, Mr. Breo, that prior to writing that article, you had not sat down and talked to Dr. Crenshaw?
That's correct.
You did not interview him, is that right?
I did not.
In fact, before writing the articles, you never met Dr. Crenshaw, talked with him, or even had seen him in person. Is that right?
That's correct.
And before writing the articles, you did not research the references to Dr. Crenshaw in the Warren Commission testimony.
Object to the
Is
form.
that right?
Object to the form of the question.
I did read the entire Warren Commission report, and there were no references to Dr. Crenshaw.
Oh, you're talking about the summary report.
No, what is called the summary report is indeed the full and complete and only report.
Well, you know, as you sit here today, that because we've already covered this in prior depositions, that Dr. Crenshaw is referred to on several occasions by medical personnel in their testimony to the Warren Commission.
We have to distinguish between the report and the 26 volumes of exhibits and transcripts, which are not part of the full report.
Objection, non-responsive. Mr. Breo, you know that in the volumes of testimony to the Warren Commission that there is testimony by the medical personnel to the Commission concerning Dr. Crenshaw's presence and participation there at Parkland Hospital on November 22nd, 1963.
Object to the form of the question. Go ahead.
I did not know that at the time I wrote the articles. I now know that there are a few references to Dr. Crenshaw in the 26 volumes of supplementary exhibits.
Okay, well, let's go back to my question then. Before writing the articles, you did not research the references to Dr. Crenshaw in the Warren Commission testimony.
Object to the form of the question.
Isn't that right?
Same objection.
I believed I had read the entire Warren Commission report and Dr. Crenshaw was not mentioned.
Objection, non-responsive. Are you saying that you did research in the 26 volumes of testimony to the Warren Commission to try to find out whether or not Dr. Crenshaw was mentioned in the testimony before you wrote the articles?
No, what I'm saying is that I read the commonly accepted and respected Warren Commission report, the entire 888 pages of what is the report. I did not read the additional 26 volumes of exhibits and transcripts.
So prior to writing the articles, you did not try to find out if Dr. Crenshaw was mentioned in the testimony contained in those 26 volumes?
I had, to my satisfaction, established he was not a key figure because he was not mentioned in the Warren Commission report nor in the Warren Commission index.
Objection, non-responsive. Mr. Breo, I just want the record to be clear. You said you did not read the 26 volumes that contained the testimony referring to Dr. Crenshaw, right?
Object to
Before
the
writing the
question,
articles.
that's not what he said.
Is that right?
Mr. Kasai, I'm trying to be helpful. I'm trying to draw a distinction between the Warren Commission report, the 888-page report, and the 26 volumes, which are not part of the full report, but are merely 26 volumes of exhibits and transcripts. That's the distinction I'm trying to draw.
Okay.
And Dr. Crenshaw was not mentioned in the full report nor in the index.
Okay, but he is mentioned in the 26 volumes of the testimony to the Warren report, to the Warren Commission.
I now know that, yes.
Okay. And prior to writing the articles, you did not review any portions of those 26 volumes to see if Dr. Crenshaw was mentioned in the testimony. Is that right?
It was not necessary to review those 26 volumes because the articles were not about Dr. Crenshaw.
Objection, non-responsive. Just yes or no, sir. Did you read the 26 volumes of testimony to see if Dr. Crenshaw was mentioned in there prior to writing the articles?
No.
Did any other employee or representatives of the Journal of American Medical Association, to your knowledge, meet with, speak with, or interview Dr. Crenshaw before the articles were published?
To my knowledge, no.
Now, prior to the May 27, 1992 official publication date of the articles, there was a press conference held in New York City regarding the articles. Is that right?
Yes.
And that was on May 19, 1992.
Yes.
I believe you said before that JAMA is published 48 weeks per year. Is that right?
I believe it is.
And JAMA does not have weekly press conferences.
I'm not sure about that.
Well, as far as you know, they don't have weekly press conferences. Is that right?
They might.
Well, I refer you to page 110 of your prior deposition testimony.
Might I see it?
Sure. It's right in front of you.
Let's see here. What line?
Look at line 6.
Line 6, okay. Do you want me to read it, Mr. Kazan?
Well, you say in that response that you don't monitor it from week to week, but it would be your recollection that they do not have weekly press conferences. Do you see that?
Yes.
And is that a correct statement?
Well, I went on, yes, it is, with the additional sentence that they have occasional press conferences throughout the course of the year as content and circumstances warranted.
Now, in this particular case, Dr. Lundberg told you that a press conference would be held and that you should attend. Is that right?
Yes.
And both you and Dr. Lundberg delivered remarks at the press conference. Is that right?
Yes.
these articles that you wrote that were published in JAMA on May 27, 1992 were distributed to all members of the American Medical Association, weren't they?
That I don't know.
Well, they were. Isn't that what's normally done with issues of JAMA? They're distributed to AMA members and others?
I'm not sure of the exact circulation pattern.
Well, what is your understanding? That members of the AMA are subscribers to JAMA and they get JAMA's weekly or almost weekly issues?
I think roughly members get a choice of publications, of which JAMA is one, but I really don't know the exact circulation breakdown.
Do you know approximately how many members of the American Medical Association there are?
I'd have to guess.
There are hundreds of thousands, aren't there?
I believe that's correct.
Also, these particular articles were put in reprint format and distributed to members of the media and others. Is that right?
Yes.
Now, you personally subscribed to the New York Times and did back in May of 1992. Is that right?
That's correct.
And on or about May 26, 1992, you read an article that was written in the New York Times by Dr. Lawrence Altman. Is that correct?
Object to the form of the question.
I don't recall if I read it on May 26, 1992.
You do recall the article?
I do recall the article.
And you recall reading it on or about the time it came out?
I do not recall that.
You know who Dr. Altman is because you had written a profile about him that was published in the AMA's American Medical News. Is that right?
That's correct.
I'll show you the first page of that article, which previously marked for identification purposes as Exhibit 3 III.
You mean not of my article, but of the article in the New York Times?
Yes, Dr. Altman's article.
Yeah, okay, yes.
As you can see at the first part of the article, Dr. Altman described Dr. Crenshaw as a surgeon on the trauma team that tried to save the president's life in 1963. Do you see that?
I do.
And you see down later on in the article, Dr. Altman described JAMA's research in connection with the two articles that you wrote as less than thorough.
I see that.
And do you see where Dr. Altman made the point that at least two of the Dallas doctors that you interviewed told the Warren Commission that Dr. Crenshaw was a member of the Parkland team that treated President Kennedy?
I see that.
Now, you were aware of these particular points made by Dr. Altman when you read the article. Is that right?
Object to the form of the question. You can answer if you can.
You mean when I read Dr. Altman's article that I read those points?
Right.
Yes.
And you were not particularly surprised by Dr. Altman's article. Is that right?
Object to the form of the question.
Should I answer that?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm not sure what you mean by surprise.
Well, haven't you said that you were not particularly surprised by Dr. Altman's article?
Could you show me the reference?
Yeah, look on page 158 of your deposition. Line 16. Question, were you surprised to read the article when you read it? And your answer was surprised, question mark? Question, yes. And your answer was not particularly. You see that?
I see that. I don't quite follow the question. It's, were you surprised to read the article when you read it?
And you said not particularly.
At that time, I said not particularly.
Okay.
His lawyer must have been asleep not to object to the form of that question.
After reviewing or reading Dr. Altman's article, you did not do any research to investigate whether the two Dallas doctors that you interviewed had actually testified to the Warren Commission that Dr. Crenshaw was on the Parkland trauma team that worked on President Kennedy on November 22nd, 1963, did you?
I had previously interviewed them.
Objection, non-responsive. Listen to my question, Mr. Breo. After reading Dr. Altman's article, you did not do any research to investigate whether the two Dallas doctors that you interviewed had actually testified to the Warren Commission that Dr. Crenshaw was on the Parkland trauma team that worked on President Kennedy on November 22nd, 1963, as suggested by Mr. Altman in his article.
Object to the form.
Did you?
Object to the form of the question.
I did not go back and re-interview them, no.
And you didn't do any other research to determine whether or not Dr. Altman's points that those two Dallas doctors had actually told the Warren Commission that Dr. Crenshaw was there. You did not go back to research to determine whether or not Dr. Altman was right about that.
Object to the form of the question.
On the contrary, Mr. Kasai, I did go back and do research to research Dr. Altman's contention.
And you were able to verify those contentions?
I don't know about the contentions. I found references to Dr. Crenshaw in the 26 supplementary volumes.
When did you do that research to confirm Dr. Altman's point about that?
Object to the form of the question.
I can't recall specifically.
Can you tell me approximately when?
Subsequent, probably in a month or two after the after I read the New York Times article.
Now, Mr. Breo, back when I took your deposition on September 15th, 1993, I asked you if you had done any investigation to determine whether or not Dr. Altman's statements in his article were correct, and at that time you told me that you didn't do that.
Could I see that reference?
Yes, look on pages 160 and 161 of your deposition testimony. Starting on line 24 on page 160, I asked you the question: did you do any investigation to determine whether or not Dr. Altman's statements in his article that you read on or about May 26, 1992 were correct? And you said yes, and then your counsel interjected a question, and I said, I'm talking about the statements about the fact that some of the Dallas doctors that you interviewed had testified to the Warren Commission that Dr. Crenshaw was present and part of the team that treated President Kennedy on November 22, 1963. And your counsel objected as to the form of the question, and then you said, beginning at line 13 on page 161, I did not do any research in regard to whether two doctors had told the Warren Commission that he was a member of the team.
I must have been confused by the word research, because I know somewhere in my deposition I referred to the AMA library looking up these references for me. And I'm sure that's in my deposition somewhere, that the AMA library provided me references to Dr. Crenshaw.
But
That was not my research particularly, it was the AMA library.
so are you saying that this particular statement in your testimony on September 15, 1993 was incorrect?
No, it may be confusion over the word research, or whether it was my research or the AMA library research. You know, it was a lengthy deposition.
Now, referring back to Dr. Altman's May 26, 1992 article in the New York Times, Dr. Altman also makes the point near the end of that first page that Dr. Philip Williams, a brain surgeon in Dallas, verified a telephone call from the White House to Parkland's emergency room after Oswald was shot. Do you see that reference?
And you characterized the reference how? That Dr. Williams said what?
Well, Dr. Altman states in the article that Dr. Williams verified a call from the White House to the Parkland emergency room.
I don't see the word verified here.
Can I see the article? Confirmed?
I must
You see that word?
I must be looking at the wrong place, Mr. Kazaya. What I see is Dr. Williams said he had long remembered reports.
Look, the first sentence, the second paragraph on that column.
I think you mean the third paragraph.
Okay.
Yeah, that's Dr. Altman speaking.
What did he say?
He said another doctor has confirmed such a call, although the details and who made it are not clear.
And then he goes on to refer to that doctor as Dr. Philip Williams, right?
Yes.
Okay, so you were aware of that point made by Dr. Altman at the time you read the article, is that right?
Yes.
After reading that, you did not do anything to try to verify that point, did you?
Object to the form of the question.
Yeah, that point had little or nothing to do with the purpose of our articles.
Objection non-responsive. Isn't it true, sir, that after reading that in Dr. Altman's article, you did not do anything to try to verify it?
I did not call Dr. Williams, no.
And you didn't do anything else to try to verify it?
There was no need to.
So you did not?
I did not.
Okay. Now, is it true, Mr. Breo, that you were aware that there were as many as 30 members of the medical team in Trauma Room 1 at Parkland Hospital at the time President Kennedy was brought in?
Object to the form of the question.
I'm not sure of the exact number.
Well, you have said before that there may have been as many as 30 members of the medical team in Trauma Room 1, haven't you?
That sounds roughly correct,
Okay.
yes.
And you did not try to interview many of those members of the trauma team, is that right?
Did you say any or many?
Many.
Many.
On the contrary, Mr. Kasai, I believe I did. I interviewed the 4 key physicians, in my opinion.
Okay, you interviewed 4 of the 30.
The 4 key leaders of the team of the 30 or 40, yes.
Okay, and you didn't try to interview most of the rest.
Many of the rest were not physicians. They were nurses or technicians, but I interviewed the 4 key physician leaders.
Objection non-responsive. Please, sir, isn't it true that you did not try to interview most of the rest of the members of the medical team?
I did not, no.
Okay, you did not try to interview Doctors Richard Delaney or Paul Peters. Is that correct?
No, I did not.
Okay. Now, you said that you did try to interview Doctors Kemp Clark and Ron Jones, but you were not able to do so. Is that right?
That's correct.
Now, Dr. Kemp Clark was the neurosurgeon who pronounced President Kennedy dead. Is that right?
That's my understanding, yes.
And he is the doctor who you understood may have had the best look at or opportunity to examine President Kennedy's head wound.
He might have. I'm not clear on that point.
Well, didn't you say in your article that you thought that he was the doctor who had the best observation of President Kennedy's head wound?
Object to the form of the question. The article speaks for itself.
I don't recall such a reference in the article. Could you refresh my memory?
Look on the second page of the second part of your article, first sentence of the second paragraph. What did you say there?
I said it was Dr. William Kemp Clark, a Parkland Hospital neurosurgeon, who most closely observed Kennedy's massive head wound.
Was that an accurate statement that you understood at the time?
Yes.
But Dr. Clark did not want to talk to you?
That's correct.
Just so the record is clear, Mr. Breo, prior to writing the articles, did you read or try to read any of the 26 volumes of the testimony and evidence that was presented to the Warren Commission?
Could you rephrase that, please?
Prior to writing the articles in question, did you read or try to read any of the 26 volumes of the testimony and evidence that was presented to the Warren Commission?
No, not of the 26 volumes.
Now, these articles that you wrote and that were published in JAMA on May 27, 1992 concerning the JFK assassination, let's put those aside for just the purpose of this question. Are you aware of any articles that were published in JAMA that included attacks on any individual's credibility?
I don't recall.
In this particular case?
Brad, can I jump in? We're about halfway done, and I need to make sure that we've got the right accommodations on the 11 o'clock deal, and clearly you can take this out of the time. Can we take a couple-minute break? I can hand her off and tell her that we are going to do what we talked about this morning.
Hey, what is the plan?
Hold on,
Hold on just a second.
and then we'll tell you what it is.
Okay, so how much time do I have left?
I
You have
think
about
we're at
30
a
minutes,
half hour,
yeah.
but we
30
can-
minutes? Okay, let's go off the record.
Going off the record, 10:46 a.m. We're back on the record. The time is approximately 11:05 a.m.
Mr. Breo, I'd like to step back just a second and clear up a point that was raised earlier in your deposition today. You said that you did not recall when you read Mr. Altman's article of May 26, 1992. And in that connection, I want to refer you to your deposition testimony on September 15, 1993, page 154, line 6. I asked you the question, did you read it, referring to Dr. Altman's article of May 26, on or shortly after May 26, 1992, and your answer at that time was yes.
Object to the form of the question.
Do you see that, sir?
The answer was yes, and I was referring obviously to shortly after.
So that is your best recollection, that you read it on or shortly after May 26, 1992?
That is my best recollection.
Okay. Picking up where we left off before we took the break, Mr. Breo, it's true, is it not, that you intended through the articles that you wrote for JAMA to examine Dr. Crenshaw's credibility?
Not at all. That's flat out wrong, Mr. Kazaya. The articles were not about Dr. Crenshaw.
Okay. Then I would like for you to refer to page 392 of your sworn deposition testimony taken in this case on September 22nd, 1993.
Do we?
Beginning on line 20 of page 392. I asked you the question, Mr. Breo, did you intend in your JAMA articles to attack the credibility of Dr. Crenshaw? And your answer on that date was, I did not. I intended to examine his credibility. Do you see that?
I do see that.
And was that a true statement?
It was a true statement of the writing of the articles, but not the purpose of the original interviews.
But you did intend to examine Dr. Crenshaw's credibility in your articles?
After I had interviewed his colleagues, and in writing the article, yes.
It's true also, Mr. Breo, that JAMA has no policies, procedures, or guidelines applicable to researching, reporting, and writing articles like that.
Not in a formal, spelled-out manner, no.
And you can't recall any other JAMA articles where you attempted to examine the credibility of an individual. Isn't that correct?
I don't agree with that statement at all, Mr. Kazaya. I mean, many articles might examine credibilities.
Okay, I refer you to page 394 of your sworn deposition testimony on September 22nd, 1993.
Okay, what was the citation again?
Page 394.
Okay.
I asked you the question beginning at line 9. Have you written any other articles for JAMA in which you, to use your words, examined the credibility of any individuals? And your answer was, I can't recall. Do you see that?
Yes.
And was that a true statement then?
Yes, I can't recall. Yeah, there may have been some, there may not.
There is an objection to.
Now, Mr. Breo, during the course of your work as a journalist and a writer, you have written articles in the past that contain errors. Is that right?
I'm sure I've made mistakes here and there, sure.
Okay. And quite often you have learned of those errors through letters to the editor?
That's among other ways.
And on occasion, JAMA has therefore printed corrections or clarifications, is that right?
I'm not sure if JAMA has in regard to my articles. They do have, I believe they do have a corrections page.
Well, I refer you to page 399 of your sworn deposition testimony on September 22nd, 1993,
Okay.
beginning on line 11.
All the testimony was sworn.
Do you see where I asked you the question, were any such errors significant enough for you to have done anything about them? And your answer at that time was, occasionally we have printed the letter with an editor's note, a correction, a clarification.
Yeah, I see that, you know, Mr. Kazaya, as I said.
That's the only question. Do you see that?
Is that was that a correct statement?
It was and is within the context of 28 years of reporting.
Okay. Well, in fact, with regard to the two articles that you wrote on the JFK assassination that were published in the May 27, 1992 edition of JAMA, JAMA later published a correction in the October 7, 1992 edition, didn't it?
Could you show me what you're referring to?
Yes, I refer you to page 1686 of the October 7, 1992 edition of JAMA.
Is this an exhibit, Brad?
No?
For the record, then, I think it should be identified that this is JAMA with the cover of October 7th, 1992, and you're referring to page 1686 and a column in the bottom that says correction.
Do you see that, Mr. Breo?
Yes.
So on October 7, 1992, JAMA did publish a correction concerning the articles that you wrote and that were published on May 27, 1992. Is that right?
Yes.
And what was that correction?
It's rather lengthy. Would you like me to read it?
No, just tell me the bottom line. I mean, you remember the correction.
The bottom line of the correction, or the
Yes.
bottom line of type, or the bottom line explanation?
What, in essence, was the correction, if you would, please, sir?
The correction essentially was that Dr. Humes and Boswell were not breaking a 29-year silence, as my articles described it, but Dr. Humes is breaking only a 25-year silence, because it subsequently came to our attention that he had done a brief interview with CBS.
Did you think that whether Dr. Humes had broken a 29 years of silence as you had written or a 25-year silence was significant?
It is significant in terms of we felt a need to correct the record. I think in terms of the value and the contributions of the articles, it is not terribly significant, no.
But it was significant enough to correct it in the record and publish a correction in JAMA.
The people who run that, I do not, made the correction, yes.
But no corrections have been published with regard to anything stated specifically about Dr. Crenshaw in your articles. Is that right?
Not to my knowledge at this time.
Let's go back to talk about some of the documentation that was generated in connection with those articles. Now, there were some drafts of the articles before publication that contain editorial comments of Dr. Glass and Dr. Lundberg. Is that right?
Yes. Might I refer to your previous question when you referred to corrections? You know, I'm not aware that there was anything that needed to be corrected in regard to Dr. Crenshaw. You're not implying that there was something that had to be corrected?
Well, obviously, yes. I think that there are numerous things that need to be corrected, but there being no question before you, I'll have to object to your statement. Those drafts of the articles with editorial comments have been discarded, is that right?
Yes.
And you made notes from your interviews with the various doctors prior to writing articles, is that right?
That's correct.
And those notes have been discarded?
Yes.
And you actually recorded the interviews on a tape recorder, is that right?
I did.
And those tape recordings have been discarded?
Yes,
And after you made the tape recordings, you personally made handwritten transcripts of the tape recordings. Is that right?
I did.
And those transcripts have been discarded.
It's my routine and practice to discard them, and I did in this case.
Okay. And with regard to your remarks at the press conference on May 19th, 1992, you had prepared some written remarks. Is that right?
Very brief, yes.
And you discarded those written remarks.
Yes.
You and Dr. Lundberg traveled to Florida in April of 1992 to meet with Dr. Humes and Dr. Boswell in preparation for your first article. Is that right?
That's correct.
And you did not try to set up the interviews with any of the Dallas doctors for that second article that you wrote until after your meeting with Dr. Humes and Boswell. Is that right?
I believe that's correct, yes.
You said that sometime after your interviews with Dr. Humes and Boswell, you read the book JFK Conspiracy of Silence. Is that right?
Yes,
But you made no highlights or underlining in the book,
I did not.
and your copy of the book that you said that you read has been discarded.
I'm not sure if it's been discarded or if I gave it to someone else and it's in their possession.
But you don't know where it is.
I don't, as I sit here, I do not know where it is, no.
You did not try to confirm Dr. Crenshaw's presence in Parkland Hospital's Trauma Room 1 where President Kennedy was treated prior to writing the articles, did you?
Object to the form of the question.
Of course I did. I talked to the 4 key members of the doctors who did not recall Dr. Crenshaw being in the room. Had they confirmed he was in the room, I would have so reported.
Well, you interviewed Dr. McClellan, didn't you?
I did interview Dr. McClellan.
And when you interviewed Dr. McClellan, he told you that when President Kennedy was brought into Parkland Hospital on November 22nd, 1963, that he and Dr. Crenshaw walked into the Parkland emergency room together. Isn't that right?
Into the emergency room, but not the trauma room, yes.
But you didn't mention that in your article, did you?
The purpose of my article interview with Dr. McClellan was not whether or not Dr. Crenshaw was in the trauma room. It came up obliquely.
Objection unresponsive. You did not mention the fact that Dr. McClellan told you that he and Dr. Crenshaw had walked into Parkland's emergency room together in your article, did you?
Object to the form of the question. The article speaks for itself.
I did not.
In fact, you did not directly ask Dr. McClellan if Dr. Crenshaw was working on President Kennedy in Trauma Room 1, did you?
I can't recall. It was not the purpose of the interview.
So you did not try to confirm that?
As I said, I did. In interviewing the 4 key members of the team, none recalled seeing Dr. Crenshaw in the trauma room. Had they confirmed it, I absolutely would have reported it as such.
Objection unresponsive. But you did not report what Dr. McClellan told you about that?
Dr. McClellan did not confirm Dr. Crenshaw's presence in the trauma room either. He just remarked that they walked into the large emergency room together, and my recollection of our interview was that he then lost track of what Dr. Crenshaw did, since Dr. McClellan, went right to the patient's side.
But you didn't directly ask Dr. McClellan if he saw Dr. Crenshaw in Trauma Room 1 working on President Kennedy?
Mr. Kazai, I'm
Yes or no,
trying to
please.
be helpful. It was not the purpose of the interview.
So you
I
didn't
did
ask
not.
him that?
I did not.
Okay. On page 426 of your deposition on September 22nd, 1963,
Okay, 426, yes.
yes,
Okay.
beginning at line 18, I asked you the question, but you're saying that you did not intend to attempt to rebut that point in Dr. Crenshaw's book that he was there in Trauma Room 1 when resuscitative efforts were performed on President Kennedy. And your answer at that time was, Dr. Crenshaw was not a big part of this effort in any way, shape, or form to either rebut, confirm, take issue with, whatever. Right?
That's what I said, yes.
And then earlier on that same page, I had asked you, and did you try to rebut that point in your article? And at line 5, you said, Dr. Crenshaw was not the subject of my article. I neither tried to rebut nor confirm his presence. That was not the intent.
That was not the intent for the...
Now, wait a minute. That's somebody asking. He's asking you, did he read that correctly?
Yes, you did.
And was that a correct statement? That you did not try to rebut nor confirm his presence?
In fairness, there was more to the answer than what you just read.
Yes, there's another paragraph, but that's what it says, yes.
Okay. The second article that you wrote pertaining to your interviews of some of the Dallas doctors, do you have that in front of you?
Part 2?
I think you must have taken it back.
It's right there. That's
my copy.
Yeah. I don't have a copy, no.
Of what?
Part 2. Yeah, Part 2.
In the article, you refer to the fact that the articles was written with interviews for these Dallas doctors in the wake of the publication of Dr. Crenshaw's book, JFK Conspiracy of Silence.
Yes.
And then later on in that same column, you wrote, some suspect that Crenshaw was not even in the trauma room. Do you see that?
That's a object to the form of the question.
Do you see where in the third paragraph of the second column you have written the words, some suspect that Crenshaw was not, an emphasis on the word not, even in the trauma room?
I see those, yes.
Okay. Who were you referring to as supposedly suspecting that Dr. Crenshaw was not in the trauma room?
That's just a literary reference, nobody in particular. It's a summary of the quotes to follow in the next 4 or 5 paragraphs.
Can you identify any person who you claim expressed to you suspicion that Dr. Crenshaw was not even in the trauma room?
None of the 4 I interviewed recalled him being in the trauma room, and that was a summary statement saying that no one recalled him being in the trauma room.
Okay, well, you have made, I object to your answers being non-responsive, because you have made a statement that none of those 4 doctors recalls seeing him. You've made that statement, right?
Right.
But you also made the statement that some suspect that Dr. Crenshaw was not even in the trauma room. And my question, again, is who were you referring to? And please identify those persons who you claim expressed such suspicion to you.
That question has been asked, and I think there's been a responsive answer. I don't want to get in an argument about it. Please answer in the same fashion you just did.
Nobody in particular. It was just a literary statement summarizing the quotations to follow.
And those were your words?
What words?
Some suspect that Crenshaw was not even in the trauma room?
That was my summary.
Well, I just want to make clear, those were your words and not the words of any other person.
It is what it is. It's a summary followed by the quotes of the 4 physicians.
Well, I just want the record to be clear, Mr. Breo, that is what you wrote, and that's not a quote of anybody.
It's not in quotation marks, no.
So it's not a quote.
No.
Can you identify anybody who you claim told you that they suspect that Dr. Crenshaw was not there?
That is a paraphrase of the quotes that follow.
Objection non-responsive. I'm asking for the identity of persons who you claim told you that they suspected Dr. Crenshaw was not there. Can you identify any such person?
Yes, the 4 key physicians I interviewed did not recall seeing Dr. Crenshaw in the trauma room. And my statement was nothing more than a paraphrase and a summary of that fact.
Okay. Is there any other basis for your having said that some suspect that Dr. Crenshaw was not even in the trauma room, other than your statement that 4 doctors told you that they did not remember whether or not they saw him there?
It's only my summary of the interviews I did with the 4 doctors, and they're what they told me.
Now, you also interviewed Dr. Rose, and he never said anything to suggest to you that he doubted Dr. Crenshaw was in trauma room 1, did he?
Dr. Rose was not in the trauma room, and that was not the purpose of the interview, and no, he did not refer to Dr. Crenshaw in that sense.
Other than the interviews that you did with the 4 doctors, Perry, Jenkins, Carrico, and Baxter, you did not do anything else to investigate whether there was evidence to support Dr. Crenshaw's point that on November 24th, 1963, a call was received at Parkland by someone claiming to be LBJ, did you?
I don't believe I did, except I do think I saw some reference that the White House logs did not indicate such a call. Other than that, I did no other research, no.
Was that before or after you wrote your articles?
I believe it was before.
What makes you say that?
I can't recall specifically. I just have a recollection that somewhere I had read that the White House logs did not support such a call.
But you don't remember when you read it?
I do not, no.
And as a matter of fact, in your prior deposition on September 22nd, 1963, you did not remember doing anything other than talking to those 4 doctors. You didn't even remember that.
Essentially, I just took the collective statements of the 4 doctors, yes.
And you quoted Dr. Baxter on that point, but you did not think it was important that Dr. Baxter may not have even been present at the time.
Object to the form of the question.
Isn't that right?
I thought it was important that he spoke for the group. But these were the key core physicians. I had great reliability in them, great comfort in their reliability, and that's why I reported it.
But you didn't think it was important that he was not even present at the time?
Object to the form of the question.
Sure, it's important, but not as important as the history and the experience of the 29 years of these 4 key physicians who were in Parkland in 1963 and were still there in 1992, and who are generally acknowledged to be reliable leaders of the team. My comfort level was okay.
You did not ask Dr. McClellan.
And Mr. Kazaya, I did not know at the time of the interview that Dr. Baxter was not in the room at the time of the alleged phone call.
And you did not even ask Dr. McClellan about that point, is that right?
I don't believe I did.
At the end of your articles, you wrote that the articles were an attempt to confront the defamers of the truth. Is that right?
Confront the what?
Defamers of the truth.
The end of which article?
The second article.
Yes.
And by that, you meant that you were trying or making an effort to counter or rebut those who you consider to be defamers of the truth. Is that right?
Not necessarily, no. It's just it refers to nobody in particular. It's just a literary reference playing off the statement in a previous paragraph when I quote Dr. Earl Rose, who said, quote, "The defamers of the truth can only be confronted." I have to put on my reading glasses, excuse me. Dr. Rose said, "The defamers of the truth can only be confronted and defeated by the truth." And then in the next sentence, I just refer back to that.
Or you said that the article was our attempt to confront the defamers of the truth. Is that right?
Yes,
And our being meaning JAMA?
yes.
Normally, letters from readers to JAMA that are specifically in response to your articles are forwarded on to you for your reading and possible response. Is that right?
Oh, that's correct, yes.
And in this particular case, some letters were received and referred on to you but were not published in JAMA. Is that right?
I believe there are some, yes.
But you did write a reply to a letter to JAMA from readers that was published in the October 7th, 1992 edition of JAMA. Is that right?
Could I see that, please?
It was previously marked as Exhibit 3F.
3 what?
F.
F.
Page 1684.
Okay.
Do you see your reply there?
Yes.
Okay, on the preceding page, there's the beginning of a letter that was written to JAMA by Professor Wayne Smith from the School for Advanced International Studies at Johns Hopkins. You see that?
He's starting there, maybe.
Yeah, yes.
Okay.
Doesn't show that he's a professor, but I don't think.
All right, the first point made in Professor Smith's letter is that he was talking to Mr. Breo's article. He suggested Dr. Charles Crenshaw, meaning you suggested Dr. Charles Crenshaw wasn't even in the room, so how could he know anything? Yet Crenshaw is identified at least 5 times in Volume 6 of the Warren hearings as one of the attending physicians. He does have reason to know. Do you see that?
I do.
And do you remember that letter?
Now that I see it, I recall.
Okay.
Yes.
Now let's look at your reply. That's on the next page. As you can see, the second paragraph of that reply is in quotation marks. Do you see that?
Yes.
Is that a reference to the remarks that you made at the May 19th, 1992 press conference?
I think it's a rough
Definitely not.
translation.
Well, it's in quotation marks.
Yes.
And you're quoting yourself. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And you say in that reply that's published in JAMA on October 7th, 1992, for years the American public has been hearing from people who were not in Trauma Room 1 in Dallas. You see that?
Yes.
And then you go on to say what we now have are the reports of the physicians who were on the scene. You see that?
Yes.
And when you say now have reports of the physicians, you're talking about the 4 doctors that you interviewed from Dallas?
And the 2 autopsy physicians.
And then you conclude by saying, we now have the facts about these critical events in the words of the only people who know these facts. Right?
I see that, yes.
You certainly weren't referring to Dr. Crenshaw there, were you?
I was referring to nobody in particular. I was referring to the physicians I'd interviewed.
After Dr. Altman's letter, or rather his article was published in the New York Times, did Dr. Lundberg tell you to check out Dr. Altman's points in his article and confirm whether or not some of the doctors had testified to the Warren Commission that Dr. Crenshaw was there?
I can't recall specifically. He might have.
Did you try to, in writing your articles, avoid creating the impression that Dr. Crenshaw had just supposedly made up his observations regarding President Kennedy's wounds?
I'm having trouble following the question. The question is what?
Did you try, in writing the articles, to avoid creating the impression that Dr. Crenshaw had supposedly just made up his observations regarding President Kennedy's wounds?
Did I avoid trying to create I did not believe Dr. Crenshaw made anything up, if that's what you're asking. I mean,
So you did not try to create that impression?
no, I was just interviewed and reported what Dr. Crenshaw's colleagues told me.
Okay. Did you try to avoid creating that impression?
That he had made it up?
Yes.
I didn't try to do anything other than report what these 4 key physicians had told me, and they took strong exception with some of Dr. Crenshaw's claims.
Okay. Objection, non-responsive. Mr. Breo, you said that you did not try to create the impression that what Dr. Crenshaw was saying he just made up. So my question for you now is, did you try to avoid creating that impression?
I object to the form of the question. Mischaracterizes his prior testimony. Go ahead.
I was trying to reconcile contrasting points of view on a major controversy, which is something, as a medical correspondent, I've done for 28 years. Dr. Crenshaw had made claims and I interviewed his colleagues, and presented them with those claims, and they did not agree with those claims, and in some cases they took strong exception to them. That was the purpose, that was the contribution of the article.
Objection, non-responsive.
I'm trying to be helpful, Mr. Kazai.
Well,
If you could give me one question.
Okay, this is how you can be helpful, Mr. Brown. Just please, if you could, answer this yes or no. Did you try to avoid creating the impression that Dr. Crenshaw had made up his observations about President Kennedy's wounds?
Yes.
Did you try to avoid creating the impression that Dr. Crenshaw was not in Trauma Room 1 when President Kennedy was treated there?
I simply reported what I was told. I was unclear then, and I'm unclear now as to whether Dr. Crenshaw was in Trauma Room 1. I do not know.
Okay, objection, non-responsive.
Brad, you're at an hour since...
This is my last question.
Okay.
Mr.
One more
Breo,
question.
Please, yes or no. Did you try to avoid creating the impression that Dr. Crenshaw was not in Trauma Room 1?
Object to the form of the question.
Yeah, I have trouble following the question, I really do. I just reported what I reported.
Okay. But did you make a conscious effort to avoid leaving your readers with the impression that Dr. Crenshaw was not even in Trauma Room 1?
All I tried to do is report what I was told. Now, whatever impression that creates, it creates. I was not trying to do anything other than interview and report.
Okay, I still have to object. It's non-responsive. Mr. Brill, please.
Well, that was a totally responsive
Well, I think
answer.
that the answer this question can be answered yes or no. Did you make a conscious effort to try, in writing the article, to avoid leaving the impression that you were suggesting that Dr. Crenshaw wasn't there?
You don't have to answer that yes or no, Mr. Breo.
I find it very hard to reduce that question in the article to a simple yes or no answer.
So
It
you,
assumes facts that aren't really in evidence, that there was some mysterious thought out there that he had to work his way around. I don't think there was.
I can say absolutely, Mr. Kazaya, that I had no ill will toward Dr. Crenshaw's book. I simply interviewed his colleagues and reported what they told me. And the article just calls it as I saw it.
I still have to object. It's non-responsive. Let me make one more try. As we sit here today, Mr. Briel, can you affirmatively state for the record that you endeavored and tried to avoid creating an impression that Dr. Crenshaw was not in Trauma Room 1?
That question's been asked and answered, and our time is up. So, let's go.
Chip, you're not going to let him answer that question?
He's going to give you the same answer he's given you the previous 3 times.
Well,
And you want to hear it again?
I want him to have an opportunity to answer it.
Well, he's had an opportunity to answer, and he's answered it.
Well, I don't think so.
Well, he has, so...
Can we
Good
have... Are you instructing him not to answer?
No.
I believe I have answered the question.
Would you read the question back to him just one more time?
The judge put an hour time limit on this. I'll let you ask an additional question. I think he's been responsive in his answer. I'm not telling him not to answer it. I'm just saying the deposition's over.
Go ahead and read the question to him back.
Is the camera still on?
I'm still going.
You can go as long as you want, but you're about to see an empty chair, so. So let's go.
Go ahead.
You can unclip the time.
Question is, you sit here today, Mr. Brion, can you affirmatively state for the record that you endeavored and tried to avoid creating an impression that Dr. Crenshaw was not in Trauma Room 1?
And I believe...
No, you don't have to answer that. We're done. We're done. We're done.
Turn off the camera.
He's not going to answer the question?
He's already answered the question, Brad. Come on, that's an unfair question.
I don't think that's an unfair question at all.
Well, we disagree, but to the extent he's got an answer, he's already given it to you, so.
So there's not going to be anything further?
That's right. That's right.
Okay.
Going off the record, 11:39 a.m.